Hey, friends, welcome to a special bonus episode of the Broken to Beloved podcast. If you're looking for compassionate conversations that provide practical resources to move toward healing and wholeness, this is the place for you. Today, I'm sharing my conversation from our 2024 summit with Suzanne Stabile about deconstruction and reconstruction. We cover all kinds of ground, including a willingness to talk about trauma, religious manipulation, setting boundaries, and of course, about the Enneagram. As an internationally recognized Enneagram Master, Suzanne has conducted over 500 Enneagram workshops over the past 30 years to audiences all over the country and is lovingly referred to as the Enneagram godmother. She has served as a high school professor, the first women's basketball coach at SMU after Title IX, and as the founding director of Shared Housing, a social service agency in Dallas. She hosts the Enneagram Journey podcast and has authored 3 books, including The Road Back to You and The Journey Toward Wholeness, and is also the series editor for an excellent devotional series for each of the 9 types. Just a reminder that this is a replay episode, so any links or dates may not still be relevant. And now, here's my conversation with our friend, Suzanne. Suzanne, thank you so much for coming back and joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Brian. I'm happy to get to talk with you.
Me too. Last year, we talked about the Enneagram and trauma. Yeah. And I'd love to give an update on what you, and maybe even I, have learned since then, because it feels like it's been a long year with a lot of learning.
Yeah, I think the thing that I would say that's an unexpected surprise for me is how many people have experienced trauma who are now willing to talk about it. So in my cohorts, people come together 4 times in a year from all over the country. And we get a lot of really good work done in that setting. And the stories that people introduce themselves with are changing. From not basic, we kind of don't do that in cohort work. You know, at the Micah Center, people want to know what your number is. They don't ask what you do for a living early on. That comes much later, if ever. And then they introduce themselves to one another on the first Thursday that we're together. And I'm surprised by how much trauma there is in the room for each of the cohorts that I participate in teaching. I'm also surprised by some things and concerned, I would say. You know, I'm a big fan of being able to talk about trauma in terms of little t trauma and big T trauma. But I think trauma is becoming a word that people kind of throw around a little bit. Yeah. People who haven't experienced trauma have picked up the word as if their experience is trauma. And it's the same thing has happened with narcissists. All of a sudden, people are labeling other people as a narcissist. And I bet if you asked them, 95% don't know the definition of a narcissist. So I'm a little concerned that it's becoming socially maybe valuable to have experienced some trauma. And that we don't need that. And people who have experienced trauma don't need that. The other thing I would say, and we talked about this last year, and I imagine we'll talk about it anytime we're together, but the other thing I would say is I'm reading more and learning more and becoming more aware of how subtle religious manipulation can be. And how many people, I thought when I thought 15 years ago, you know, we're kind of done with this whole thing of having to choose a denomination, and we can be accepting of other denominations and their way of seeing the world. I thought we were much better than we are. And I hear more and more from people who are in the room with me, wherever I'm teaching, that they have really suffered at the hands of church teaching pastors. I'm concerned about that. Those two things have surprised me. I actually thought way back that social media was going to make people behave because they wouldn't want other people to know that they're misbehaving.
Yeah.
And everybody has a way of communicating now, should they want to.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't seem to have offered a boundary to anyone. But again, it gets to be, oh, you haven't experienced any trauma? Well, then you won't understand our conversation. Or, we've all experienced it. And so we're in and you're out. As opposed to the days when if you had experienced some kind of trauma, you were the one on the outside looking in.
Interesting.
And I'm not trying to negate any trauma that anybody has experienced.
Sure.
I just don't want us to use language inappropriately because it doesn't serve anybody well.
Yeah, that's really good. That's important. I got an email yesterday from someone who just registered for the summit, and it was from a pastor saying, hey, there are so many resources out here for those who have been wounded by the church or pastors or elders. I can't find anything for us pastors who have been abused or traumatized. Do you have anything? And I was just like, wow. And I know it happens. I'm a pastor who was abused and traumatized in the church by other leaders. And I know it comes from congregation members too. And I think we do have to be careful anytime the language shifts to, like you're saying, an inside-outside point of view.
Right.
An us versus them kind of dichotomy, or when it becomes exclusive or inclusive of any kind of way, that just perpetuates the abuse and trauma from the other extreme.
Isn't it fascinating that people can't feel like they're in unless somebody's out? That fascinates me. And that's a big reality, I think. And I'm fascinated by what you just said, because those of us who are in relationship with a church pastor or who are pastors know that church antagonists can destroy your peace, your appointment. In the Methodist Church, we're appointed. Your family, it is a real thing. And I'm so glad you talked about that, because I have not thought about the fact that there's not much for pastors. I can tell you one thing that is helpful, and that is the book Antagonists in the Church. He also wrote another book, and there's a book also by a different author, the title of which is Clergy Killers. Same thing. They're very good.
Antagonists in the Church is Kenneth Hawk. Is that
it is. That's exactly right. And he wrote another book, I think, same topic.
All right. We'll look him up and add him to the links. And I think you shared a story a while ago, even just of you and the Reverend's experience in several churches and how hurtful it was for you, and how you wouldn't change any of it, having come through it, when you talk about liminal space and just kind of that wandering period. So for people who have experienced it on either end, from churches or at churches, either in pastoral leadership or as a congregant, what is something they can do, or what is a way that you processed it, maybe if we can't prescribe something for everyone, that helped you find inertia to start moving again and not feel so stuck?
Yeah. Well, Joe and I made a rule that we could not talk about church antagonists or unreasonable church problems in our bedroom, while we were eating, in our bathroom and closet area when we were getting ready in the mornings, and in our prayer space at home. So that meant that we had to make an appointment to go to the family room or outside or run errands and do it in the car to talk about this person or persons who were creating so much pain for the church, many of the church members, and for us. And that kept it from being bigger than it is. It's so easy with things that we don't understand, regardless of Enneagram number, to overtalk it or to not talk about it enough, but to overthink it. And there's a point where what you're talking, what you're saying, or what you're thinking is what you've made up about what's going to happen when you don't really know. The other thing I think that happens if you overtalk it or overthink it is it keeps you from asking valuable questions about how to respond and about who to trust and about why. Why is this happening? And generally, it doesn't have anything to do with you. I always say problems in the church are never about what they're about.
Yeah.
And so that rule served us well. And it was surprisingly hard to keep.
Yeah. That's,
I'd start making a deal with Joe. I really need to talk about this now, but I have to get ready to go. So could we just talk about it in this room now? And he said the answer was always, he's good with boundaries. Nope, that's not the rule. And so rather than have something get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, it stayed the size that it was, which was generally manageable.
That sounds wise. There's a book called The Thing Beneath the Thing by Steve Carter.
I don't know that book. Sounds good, though.
That kind of addresses that idea that almost always the thing that we're arguing about or anxious about or angry about is not the actual thing.
Right.
So if you're willing to do the work and just ask the question why about 4 times or 4 layers deep, then usually you'll get to the thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's really wise.
And it requires a contemplative space that you hold and create with a contemplative practice, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think so often, like you're saying, it's not usually the result of something that's directed specifically at us, but
Right.
we are the result of collateral damage of someone else who is unwilling to do their work. And so often I found that part of the solution has a lot to do with self-awareness, either on our part or on the part of the leader, but really we can only control ours.
Right.
So when it comes to trying to find a way forward, that awareness is key of what did I experience? How do I name it? Where did it come from? Why am I responding this way to what happened to me? And we talked a lot last year about Enneagram and stances and being repressed in our thinking, feeling, or doing. So for people who have a hard time accessing their emotions or knowing what to do things about things or don't know how to think productively, how do we start to bring up those centers to do those things more productively?
Well, for all 3 of them, one of the things that I think is helpful, there are a lot of documentaries available about large organizations, religious organizations, where people have been manipulated and hurt. And when you can watch that in somebody else's life, it at one point or another requires that you use all 3 centers of intelligence. So for aggressive numbers, it's easier for them to feel sad for other people who are being manipulated, which then is the path for them to feel sad for themselves. They can feel angry for other folks, same thing, then that's the path for them to be angry about what is happening or what did happen. And it also makes it right size. You know, things need to be right sized in order to work through them.
Yeah.
And when you hear or see the stories of other people, it puts your story in right size, which might be really big and it might be not so big. And that makes, regardless of which happens, it makes it more manageable. And you have a better chance of dealing with it in a healthy way if you use all three centers. I also am a fan of, I'm a journaler. That's not a word, I don't think. But I always have been. And a lot of my work then is on paper and in my journals. But there are people who are not.
Mm-hmm.
And Hunter Mobley taught me to journal at least one line every day. And the way you start the journal entry is, from this day I remember, experienced that. And Levenger, I don't know who else, but Levenger has several journals that give you, they're 5-year journals, and they give you, or 2 lines for each day. And so from this day I remember is the prompt that I use. And, 2 lines from every day, you get tired of saying, I remember that I don't like to go to the grocery store, or I remember that and you begin to say, this came up today and I haven't thought about it in a year, or it's very helpful. And what I'm finding with people that have been part of the work that I do, who are using those, is that after they've been at it for a while, they can go back through and see where they were thinking that day, feeling another day, or doing something another day. And then you can figure out where the balance is lacking and where it's strong. It's a good practice, and everybody can do it. There's no, you don't have to get a Levenger journal. I would have to, but you don't, and I would have to have the right pen, but you don't have to. You can use a spiral notebook and it'll work the same way.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's just taking that time for active reflection.
Yeah. And the lovely thing is, once you start to do it, then you begin to reflect during the day about what you want to look back on from the day, or what's important to look back on from the day.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, I think everybody should have a therapist. I mean, that's common knowledge. And that's not going to change. And I think everyone has to have a contemplative practice. Period. And aggressive numbers have tried to talk me out of it for years. Here's why I don't need one. Here's why. You should think about this. You're not an aggressive number, so you don't know why we don't need that. So I'm holding strong.
Yes, and you continue to hold that line. Well, I think what's really helpful there is, I think when we've been abused or when we've experienced trauma, it's really temptingly easy, not necessarily to fall into a victim mindset, but just the you don't understand, or you haven't experienced, or any of those things. And then you, like we said earlier, you create this exclusive group of outsiders and insiders.
Mm-hmm.
And then it becomes easy to read the literature or to start to do the work and think that something else doesn't apply to you.
Right.
There's this exceptionalism that happens.
Right.
And I think that starts another dangerous journey or slippery slope, or whatever analogy we want to use. I spoke with a pastor recently who read one of the books in our resources and from one of our other speakers, Pivot, the idea of building a healthy culture in a church. and found himself reading certain sections. And so I see how this would apply to this other church. And thank God that we do these things really well. And so we don't need to implement this one thing.
Yeah.
And then caught himself 20 minutes later, was like, I can't believe I just said that. That means we actually really need this even more.
Yeah, that's right.
And I think that act of humility for ourselves, when we're reading the work that we will easily apply to someone else, to be able to say, hold on, where do I need this in my life? Where do I mean, what harm could taking 2 minutes to journal one line do, right? Instead of just ignoring it or saying, oh, that's good for someone else, but not for me.
Yep. Yep. You know, Richard Foster is one of my favorite authors. He's a Quaker, and he, I think, can take a big bow for making spiritual practices accessible for lay folks. Henry Nouwen did the same thing. And he wrote a book probably 30 years ago, maybe 35. And I'm pretty sure the title is Money, Sex, and Power. And I think we believe that we understand how tricky it is to deal with money. I think we are just becoming a culture that at times can be open and honest about sex. And I think I bet if you and I had the time and the staff to look at how many books have been written that are to help someone achieve power, as opposed to books written talking about how dangerous power is, it would be astonishing.
Yeah.
And pastoral power, in the absence of awareness and someone who is over them, can just so easily get out of hand.
Yeah.
And to be fair, I think the same is true of some doctors. I think doctors get to a place where they see themselves as saving people's lives and being good at all the things that they do well. But when it becomes power instead of a gift, then there's a problem.
Yeah.
And I'm sure we could talk about it you can talk about it for Joe and me, because the most dangerous thing that could happen to us and to life in the Trinity ministry is if we had founder syndrome. And that's all about power. And when we learned about it, we went straight to our board and said, if you ever see this behavior in either one of us, then jump on it, because we're telling you right now, this is not who we want to be. And so I think that whole idea of being accountable to other people is one of the things that has made abuse in churches possible, because a lack of accountability is dangerous. Yeah. Period.
Yeah. So for people here, and it's interesting seeing and hearing from more pastors and leaders who are showing up to this event and to these kinds of conversations. We can't control anyone other than ourselves.
Right.
We can't change or affect what happens or how people live their lives. We have to work on our own level of awareness. So for people who are here and watching or listening, and they've been affected or harmed by others, and they want accountability built in, but maybe they're not in a place to affect that kind of a change, how do we start asking the questions that help us grow in our own awareness? And what kind of questions do we ask?
Well, there's actually no excuse, in my way of seeing, to not have an accountability group Anybody can put that together.
Mm-hmm.
Joe and I have been part of a spiritual formation group for the last 40 years. And we don't make decisions without the accountability of that group. And when 40 years is too long for a group to exist, so we've had several.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a thing that anybody can do and that anybody can have. Another thing that I'm very fond of that makes people really nervous in terms of discernment and knowing what direction to take based on awareness is Parker Palmer's idea and teaching around trying to think what he calls it. We can look it up maybe and you can put it in. But he has created a way for you to take something that you're trying to discern to a group of people that you choose and then have the discernment process flow from that.
Is it the clearness committee?
That's it. Thank you. And clearness committees are tricky because if you're asked to be on one, then you get a letter saying, here's what I'm trying to discern. Here's the question. And should I or shouldn't I, or whatever the question is, and some information. You are sent that ahead of time and you read it and you know what's there. But when you're on a clearness committee, you cannot problem solve. You can't tell stories. You can only ask questions. That's it. And you can write things down if you want to, but you have to leave whatever notes you've taken when you leave. And the person for whom you are serving on a clearness committee is in control from then on, because if you're on the committee, you can never bring up what was discussed unless the person who originated and asked for the committee brings it up themselves. So you are preparing and going into a room to ask questions of somebody and to try to be helpful so that they can make a good decision. And then you have to leave, and that's it. It's over. And that is an experience that's like none other that I've ever had. Because if I can't tell stories, I almost can't talk, right? Because that's how I am in the world. And to ask questions but never make statements, that's its own discipline. Yeah. And to not think you know what the outcome should be. It's like, I know what's best for you. And so,
yeah.
And you can't do that either with this process. So I think it's so good. Joe and I, when we first learned about it, which is, I don't know, maybe 20 years ago, decided that we would have people trained to be at clearness committees and we would make it available to the LTM community. So we would just say to everybody in Life in the Trinity Ministry, if you have something you're trying to discern and you want to do it with a clearness committee, we have committees that are trained to help you. Just let us know.
Yeah. I love
that. You know how many people asked?
How many?
0.
Interesting.
Because people actually are looking for affirmation for what they've already decided.
Ooh.
It's very difficult for us to empty ourselves enough to be open to something that isn't what we want or what we, right? Very tricky.
Yeah.
There's a lot of discipline in that.
Oh, huge. Is it the 4 mantras that you call it? With the last one is that just don't get attached to the results?
Yep. Show up, pay attention, tell the truth, and don't get attached to the results.
And that's so hard.
It's so hard.
And I hear it so often with people who are walking through this kind of a process with, how do I get justice, or how do I build in accountability for these people, or how do I find healing, or how do I not get triggered by these scriptures or words or pastors or buildings or whatever it is. And it's so hard to walk into that space and not get attached to the results of what you're hoping for.
Yes. And it's harder for some Enneagram numbers than others.
Mm-hmm.
So if ones give you advice, it's because they're sure that's the right answer. And if twos give you advice, it's because they care about you and they want to be important in your life. So they want you to choose what they led you to. Threes pretty much, here's what I would do, and they keep moving. They don't stay attached. 3s, 7s, and 8s don't attach to results in relationship. They do in other things, but not in relationship. So I think it all comes back over and over and over to, do you have a therapist? Or do you have a spiritual director?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. As we start to wrap up, you're launching a brand new cohort for deconstruction and reconstruction.
Right.
Would you tell us about why now? What is it? What are you hoping for in it?
I have been aware for at least 20 years of how many people come to our events who have been hurt by the church. And so I changed some of my language in terms of the Enneagram because I was aware of that pain. So I'll give you one example. Instead of using the word sin, I use the word passion when I'm talking about the sin / passion for each number. I use both, but I lean more toward passion because sin is a triggering word that has been misused by so many people in powerful positions in ministry. People, because I tell stories and because I tell the story that makes up my life, people tell me the stories that make up their lives. And people walk away from abuse and pain, believing that it has to do with them and that they can just move on. And you can't move on without deconstructing what happened.
Yeah.
And feeling dominant people don't want to, and doing dominant people don't want to, and thinking dominant people don't want to. They just want it to be over and they want to move on.
Yeah.
The Enneagram always serves as a backdoor to getting to things that people are having trouble dealing with, because it provides you with a language that is not personal. It's fascinating to me how you can say something to somebody about their number and about how they act in their number, when if you use their name, they wouldn't be able to handle it. They would get angry or all the things. And so I think part of the reason we're doing that cohort is because we believe that the Enneagram can be very helpful both in deconstructing and in reconstructing. Deconstructing by itself leaves people a little too vulnerable as far as Joe and I are concerned. Spiritually vulnerable and vulnerable in relationships. And so we believe that reconstructing is the other half of the process. And reconstructing a belief system that you believe, as opposed to one that has surrounded you, but you kind of questioned it, but maybe not enough, is a process. And so we're going to try in this year with people who are in that cohort to spend time helping them appropriately name the work they need to do. And instead of, I'll do this, or I've done this and it didn't work, right? And then we're going to try to lead them in some processes that might help them reconstruct a belief system that they can wear and live into out in the world.
Yeah.
So
great.
that's our hope, and I'll have more to say in a year, I guess.
Yeah. And the cohort's already closed for this year, but we'll post the links for anyone who wants to apply or get on the wait list for next time.
That'd be great.
Thank you for explaining that. Is there anything else that we haven't mentioned that you'd like to share?
I don't think so. I'm doing some good work, new work around Enneagram and loss. So that's going to be a part of what's coming. And we're doing some work around relationships too, and how we might speak into that topic again as a couple and as a family, actually. So,
yeah, great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing with us. We'll provide all the links and the books that we talked about in the session notes. We'll post where people can find you online. Suzanne, thank you again so much for participating in the summit and helping others move toward healing and wholeness.
You're so welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
Wasn't that a great conversation? You can find all the links in the show notes. And don't forget, you can get 30% off an all-access pass from any of our annual summits now through the end of June. Just use code PODCAST30, that's 30, to take advantage of this offer today. Subscribe or follow the show to get new episodes automatically. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a rating and review or share with your friends. Our work is made possible by our generous donors. If this has been helpful to you, consider joining us today at brokentobeloved.org/support or click on the donate button in the show notes. Thanks so much for taking the time out of your day to listen. I hope it's been helpful. Here's to moving toward healing and wholeness together. I'll see you next time.